Good morning. My name is Alan Skinner, and this video presentation is for week 4 of HIUS512, Women in the American Revolution. Today I will analyze the story of revolutionary heroine Molly Pitcher through the analytical framework presented in Lee Milio's review essay of Lauren Ulrich's How Betsy Ross Became Famous. I will briefly summarize Molly Pitcher's story, perform analysis of selected sources through Milio's framework, and end with tentative conclusions. So I first became acquainted with the story of Molly Pitcher in the Army, as the Army's Field Artillery Association awards the Molly Pitcher Medal to spouses to recognize their voluntary service alongside their military spouse. So the story goes, Mary Hayes followed her artillery husband John Hayes on campaign during the American Revolution. At the Battle of Monmouth on 28 June 1778, Mary Hayes carried pitchers of water to cool the cannon, thus earning the nickname Molly Pitcher. During the battle, John was laid prostrate, so Molly took over his duties in servicing the gun. Afterwards, she was recognized by General Washington for her battlefield bravery, and the story of Molly Pitcher became an enduring symbol of the Revolution. So as described by historian John Reese, an indeterminate number of women accompanied American regular troops during the Revolution. This despite efforts by George Washington, who initially saw the women as a, quote, encumbrance, a clog upon every movement, end quote. In time, Washington adjusted his attitude, as by providing rations and support, women would perform vital logistics and medical services to the Army, and their soldier husbands were less liable to desert. Many women were not content to sit in camp, however, and despite Washington's entreaties, these women would risk their lives performing support to their men in the firing line. As with George Washington and the cherry tree, the Molly Pitcher story contains legend and embellishment. Although historians today differ on the details, the legend does appear to be based on fact. Private Joseph Martin wrote of a, quote, woman whose husband belonged to the artillery, attended with her husband at the piece for the whole time. While in the act of reaching a cartridge, a cannon shot from the enemy passed between her outspread legs without doing any other damage than carrying away all the lower part of her petticoat, end quote. As archivist Emily Teep notes, that the woman named in Martin's account, though, is not named. Making matters worse are accounts which describe a second woman, Margaret Corbin, also performing gunner duties in the same Continental Artillery unit. So why has the story of Molly Pitcher been so widely accepted? As gender historian Holly Mayer notes, honoring the women who followed the Army was problematic because although they performed proper womanly duties of bearing up their households, many of them appeared not to do so virtuously, close quote. Such post-war social attitudes led historians to overlook the contributions of women to the Continental Army. Instead, as Jerry Bell and Tracy Crow note, many accounts of women in the Army were folded into the socially acceptable legend of Molly Pitcher. Historian Linda Grant DePauw notes the story of Molly Pitcher was not wrote down until 1859, when American society held, quote, the thousands of women who had served with gun crews during the Revolution were all assumed to have been a single woman. There was no real Molly Pitcher, for like G.I. Joe, the name described a group, not an individual, close quote. According to Emily Teep, Molly Pitcher reflected female attributes prized by Republican ideologues. Quote, there was no room in the new patriarchal order for the disorderly women who had emptied piss pots on stamp agents, intimidated hoarders, or marched with Washington and Greene. Military women could not be rewarded because to do so would have dredged up the most disturbing aspects of the Revolution. End quote. Thus, the idealized and heroic female imagery of Molly Pitcher was essential as a historic symbol to reflect desired Republican values. In closing, I think it's necessary to note the importance of the real women associated with the iconic Molly Pitcher, as many facts of their story still remain untold. As historians working within a Christian worldview, we should want to tell the stories of women as equal partners in God's creation and full contributors to the founding of the new nation. The story of Molly Pitcher should be continued into the future as a symbol of the untold stories of the women in the American Revolution, but with the caveat that more research and primary sources remains to be done. Thank you for your time, and please feel free to leave comments, and this concludes my presentation.